Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments onto whatever platform you're watching on. And for most of those platforms, your comments will show up here in my chat room. The chat room is on the screen today because I don't have a guest. And I want to say good morning to Timothy Gallagher. And Timothy says, yay, in just 4 minutes, which I'm assuming have now passed, I can embrace my inner leprechaun. So, yay, embrace your inner leprechaun. And Timothy says, anyway, I thought facing that dark, shadowy thing, party monster aspect is a helpful subject. Thank you, Timothy. And yeah, that is my subject today, everyday shadow work. And I talk about the shadow frequently on this program. I talk about it frequently in life because I think it's very important in metaphysics. And what is the shadow? The shadow is the part of ourselves that we tend not to be conscious of, but still are influenced by. And it's described as the shadow because it's often the shadows. We don't see it, but it's there. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you. Shadow is created through a number of things. Traumatic events are a big part of it, traumatic emotions. And these things tend to get stored in the shadow. One of the things we often find in the shadow are belief systems, especially outdated belief systems. Hello to Kayleen in the chat room. It's good to see you, Kayleen. One of the things people very often find, and hello to Antonio Huerta in the chat room. One of the things people very often find in doing shadow work is that what they thought they felt about a situation was not all they felt about it. That there were outdated beliefs and ideas still playing in their shadow, what are sometimes called old tapes playing in the mind. Things from childhood, things from past lives even, that you're still reacting to, that you don't mean to be reacting to, that you don't still really believe, but you've never addressed and let go. I often talk about how people cross themselves up when they want to get, well, let's say an ideal romance, but they can't do it because their feelings toward romance don't allow that. To change that, you have to go into that shadow and heal those feelings, change those feelings, unblock those blockages, all different ways of saying the same thing, so that you can have a positive expectation and allow a positive solution. And then you can pursue that ideal romance. The same sometimes happens to people when it comes to the ideal job or any number of other things that they consciously would really like to have, but subconsciously or in their shadow, they don't believe it's possible. They don't believe they could ever have that. And if you don't believe you can have it, you cannot do it magically or any other way, really, because you will always stop yourself. I think the lottery is also a very good example of that. How many people say they would love to win the lottery, but in their heart, they really don't think that's remotely possible for them. And sometimes they don't think it would be good for them because, it isn't necessarily good for everyone who's done it. These are ways that we trip ourselves up. I know other people who are so reliable in their lottery wins, small ones, that they can actually figure it into their budget. They know that they're going to win $10 or $20 a week every week. And they actually put it into their budget. But they obviously have no belief system stopping them. But I have not known anyone to do that with larger sums, but I've seen people do it with small ones. So these are some of the things that we might trip ourselves up on with our shadow. Again, traumatic situations often create shadow for us. Traumatic emotions If we had a bad relationship and we never dealt with it, that's going to be part of our shadow before we are able to really get a good one. It's how you sometimes meet people who, it's part of how you meet people who seem to have the same relationship two or three times with different people. And that is a karmic entanglement, but that too is part of the shadow. Generally speaking, our karma is part of the shadow too. And hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. Um, all of the things, well, one of my favorite examples of this kind of thing comes from Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol. And in that book, they talk about the ghosts wandering the earth bound with chains. And, um, and on the chains are affixed various things. And in the context of the book, these are financial things. They're money boxes and the like. Except for saying it can be anything. That basically describes the shadow and it describes karma. And hello to Vivian P., who is joining us from Missouri. Um, and and Timothy says you can always have a shovel ready and garden. The best use of that energy. Well, actually, that's kind of what I'm saying. Um, the energy that's in your shadow, for the most part, is not useful to you. It's things that are holding you back, things that are crippling you that you need to deal with. And when you deal with them, you're effectively releasing that energy back to yourself. You're freeing up that energy and you're freeing up your ability to manifest by taking out the impediments, which is a kind of gardening. And hello to Tracy Ho in the chat room. It's good to see you. And Tracy says, gosh, it's been a long time since I came to class. Well, it's good to see you today. And today we're talking about shadow. I think some people have so much in their shadow that more of their energy is caught up there than they have available to live this life. And that's a bad place to be in. This is why we need to do shadow work. It's why we should do as much as our life allows us to do, in my opinion. And as you do that shadow work, you free up all the energy that's caught there in that shadow. It returns to you. This is, at least in a Correllian context, this is what we mean by soul retrieval. Parts of your soul's energy are caught up in these different shadow things. And as you heal them, you free up that energy and it returns to you to be used in this life in positive ways. And this is a very important thing to do. And Timothy says, how can anyone possibly fail at facing their own shadow? Do I think people do that constantly? I think everyone has had that experience at some time or another, but I also think that eventually the answer is you can't. Eventually you will face it. Eventually you will free up all that energy. But it can be hard. It can be hard to do because it can be very, very emotional. One of the things with soul retrieval, which to me is one of the most powerful forms of shadow work, and really many other forms of shadow work that are intended to free up this energy caught in the shadow, to free up and heal these issues, is that it can be emotionally as bad as going through these things the first time was. It can be very painful depending on exactly what you're doing. And that will stop people for a while. Eventually, though, your spirit will force you to face it. And this is part of what karma is all about. Mary says some people are so caught up in the negative that they don't want to take a positive step. And that's true, too. And I think we see that around us quite a bit in the world today, because I think the world is going through its own shadow work. And you can see people who are so identified with their negativity that they cannot face it or heal it. They have to go right back through it again. And hello to Sean Shed Quintus in the chat room. It's good to see you, Sean. And Timothy says it's different per individual. Well, yes, it is. My number one message to anyone who respects my opinion is that it's always different per individual. What you experience won't necessarily be what another person experiences. And the fact that they're experiencing it differently doesn't make them wrong or bad. It just makes them different. Now, it may make them frustrating, may make them hard to deal with, but they're on their own path, and they can be on their own path. You don't want to let them damage your path, but they're entitled to their own path, even if it's difficult for other people. One of the things I see a lot of in downtown Danville, in certain places, there are a large number of people. By large number of people, I'd say there are 4 or 5 of them, who seem to be living in a different reality than the one I'm in. And I know there are many other people throughout the world for whom this is true. It was true for some extent. It was true for my father. He was not quite living in the same reality I was living in. That was very, very frustrating. But did that make him bad? No, it did not. It meant he was on his own path, and a more difficult path than mine. Now, that's hard to remember when you're dealing with frustrating situations, but it is true. Now, Timothy says, yet, watching clovers get trampled is fun. Well, that's a matter of opinion. They're resilient and grow back again. Well, that's true. And I think that's true for the soul. If we look at history, history is full of horrors. It's also full of wonderful things. We don't remember them as well. Hello to Brian in the chat room. I mean, I think any of us can think of genocides and slaughters and political oppressions by the dozen throughout history. And in the present day, I can think about a number of things I deeply disapprove of going on right now. And you can probably guess what they are. I deeply disapprove of some of the things going on towards the trans population, towards the LGBTQ population, toward different racial populations. But this happens again and again in history. And I think what our lives are about is how we react to it. And hello to Jade Rising in the chat room. And hello to Mystic Order of the Sacred Circle. And Brian says, what I have found useful about shadow work is you write it down, you put it away, and whenever your timeline is, you read it again and then burn it. And yeah, I think that's a good policy. But what I was going to say is that the soul does come back from all of the horrors that it inflicts upon itself. But wouldn't it be better if we inflicted fewer? I had the good fortune to live most of my life during a period of time where people were trying to make things better. And Timothy says, green icing that tastes like styrofoam is an abomination. Well, yes, I suppose that is. But, in the abominations of life, it's a small one. We bounce back from these things as long as we survive. And, when it comes to this world, survival is very, very important. He who lives to fight another day, as they say, will be able to fight that other day. And those who do not will have another incarnation. These things are not solved through meeting violent resolutions. They're only solved through the growth of the soul. This is why our spiritual work is so important. This is why shadow work is so important. And why I wish we could get more people seeing that. Because as people heal themselves spiritually one by one, then yes, the world will get better. And when they refuse to heal, they make things worse. I am hoping we have enough people who have done enough work to be able to counter the negative things that we're seeing in the world today and perhaps roll them back. Um, am I certain of this? I don't think we can ever really be certain of anything in life, but it's my hope. And, you have to have hope. Are we ever going to have the world we formerly had? No, I don't think we will. We're going through a transformation. But where that transformation will end, certainly the political transformations of the past do not lead one to believe that the first transformation is the last. I think we've got a long way to go before we come to a stable point again. I've talked about how the United States is going through its Pluto return. And when that happens in the history of a country, and Pluto returns are so long in coming that only countries have them, people do not. It's always a time of transformation of form. And, the form we end up with is the form we ourselves will build. And so we must be prepared to build what we want to see and not simply to accept what others wish to build. And how do we do that? I've said before, we don't do that by writing a strongly worded letter to the Times. We do it through practical actions, wisely considered. And Wendy, hello, Wendy, if I haven't already said hello. Wendy Reuthner says, I'm not happy that so many feel they have the right to tell someone how to live their life when it really doesn't harm anyone. And yes, I completely agree with that. And, we started our Corellian Peace campaign back in 2015 because we felt that there were forces trying to disseminate fear and hatred in the world for ultimate nefarious purposes, and we wanted to diffuse energies of love and peace to combat this. We certainly were not completely successful with this. It is an ongoing campaign. But I think that we have had a certain amount of success versus what might have happened. But one of the things that I've often said in the subject of peace, because I've had people say, why do a peace campaign? You can never have perfect peace. You're certainly not going to have perfect peace through praying about it and doing energy work. And my answer is, well, we're not necessarily trying for perfect peace. We're trying for more peace. And every little bit makes a better world. But one of the other things I've pointed out is that peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is a world in which people can live just and satisfying lives if they're not harming anyone. And hello to Ed the Pagan in the chat room. And I'm not following all of the comments in the chat room, but that's okay. Timothy says, at least there's always a piece of the pie. And I suppose that depends on how quick you get to the table and whether you have a seat at the table. And having a seat at the table is very difficult when you are a minority community. Getting that seat at the table is very important. And it's been said that if you can't get a seat at the table, you need to make your own chair. Mystic Order of the Sacred Circle says, I desire to see everyone do as they will. Just don't insist I accept your choice if it disagrees with mine. Be you, but don't demand that I be you as well. And yeah, I've often said regarding my teachings over the years that I was never trying to create cookie cutters, that I always wanted to inspire people who were different from myself, as well as people who were similar to myself. People who had a wide range of outlooks and takes on life. And I still feel that this is very important. That I know of some organizations that I've dealt with over the years who could only deal with initiates who were exact clones in opinions and behavior of the leaders of the organization. And I've never thought that was a good thing. Now, I'll grant you, dealing with such a wide range of people has been difficult. And if you look at the history of my organizations under my leadership, there's been a lot of strife over these difficult combinations of personality. But I still think it was the right thing. And if I had to sum up my life, I would say that one of the big challenges of my life has been having a wide range of friends who come from such different backgrounds and such different personalities, and trying to get them to all get along. And I can't say that I've ever really been truly successful in that for more than a short period of time. I find I can get along with almost anyone, almost. But it doesn't necessarily mean um, that that's going to be true for anyone else. And Timothy says, "My goodness, no wonder why I'm so bad with fictional characters." I'm not quite sure what that's meaning, but I think it has to do with the whole issue of cookie cutters. And I think part of my personal attitude, and I consider this to come well under the heading of shadow work, because I think when you can't deal with people who are different from yourself, that is a shadow issue. I also think when you are so accepting um, that um, you can deal with people who are doing bad things, that also is shadow work. Learning where to make those boundaries is a big deal. But I think that if you can only deal with people just like yourself, you're very limited, and your experience will be limited. And I myself, I'm a Gemini by birth, though I have an awful lot of Taurus in my chart. And the differences between people actually tend to fascinate me rather um, than trouble me, with some exceptions, of course. And I've talked about, we cannot let people do bad things. We talk about the idea of free will and not interfering with people's free will. And as I was saying just the other day, this is when everything is equal. But if someone's free will is to go around raping people or killing people, of course you interfere with that. Um, and certain other kinds of harm as well. You do not simply sit there and let yourself be harmed because it's someone else's free will. And I think at this particular time in history, this is a very important thing for our community to bear in mind. Um, when we talk about not interfering with people's free will, we're talking about appropriate issues. We're not talking about, um, well, I have an example for that. Many years ago, we had a Corellian high priestess by the name of Fabrisia Cronin. And she once asked, because the Corellian tradition venerates the Vangelo delle Streghe and considers it to be one of our foundation stones, but also teaches the idea of harm none within a Corellian understanding, which is unprovoked or egregious harm. How can you reconcile these things? Because in the definitions many other people do, you can't. And she pointed out, the Vangelo delle Streghe says that you should not only oppose your oppressors, you should murder them in their beds if you have the opportunity to do so. While that's a bit dramatic, I actually do not disagree with that if you're in fact truly oppressed. Um, When we say harm none, when we say don't interfere with people's free will, that doesn't mean the free will to harm other people. It does not mean the free will to destroy other people, other countries, other civilizations. Um, it's referring to ordinary circumstances. As I say, from a Corellian point of view, the harm in harm none is unprovoked or egregious damage. Um, and and Timothy says, I'm awful with comedy. Okay. Um, some of us are. But these are some of my thoughts on shadow work. And I was going to do the subject of everyday shadow work today. And I haven't really addressed that so much as the shadow itself, but I'm going to give you my thought for everyday shadow work now. I'm also going to repeat Brian's suggestion, and that is my thought for everyday shadow work is that when you find yourself facing something you recognize as part of your shadow, when you find a crossed wire, when you find yourself unable to do something that you want or feel you should do because of an unconscious limitation, when you find yourself having a knee-jerk reaction to something, these are all shadow issues. Make a note that it happened and come back to it when you have the time, which is what Brian was saying also. He was saying write it down and come back when you have the time to deal with it. That is my best recommendation to everyday shadow work. And there are all kinds of ways of doing shadow work. My writings are full of them. If you read the first degree lessons, the very first lesson includes a ritual bath. Nowhere does it say that ritual bath is shadow work. But if you're familiar with shadow work, you'll immediately see that it is. Much of first degree is actually shadow work without being called it, because the word can frighten people who aren't familiar with it. It's only in chapter 8 that we introduce the concept of the shadow and intentional shadow work. But we've already been dealing with it for many chapters, and you'll find it also in other things I've written without attention being called to it. Because I think that shadow work should be a natural thing. But any of those different techniques that I give in those books is good for shadow work. I've found for myself, the two things that have been best for me are burning spells, where you write down the thing that you're trying to heal or release and you burn it as a way of sending it away, and soul retrieval, which is a kind of guided meditation. To me, they are the strongest forms of shadow work that I have encountered. Now, I'm aware there are certain forms of massage that are also very good with shadow work that physically release the blockages. I believe craniosacral is one of them, but I've never had that. I've merely heard about it. So there are different ways of approaching this, but they can all be helpful. And whatever one you choose, I think you'll find is helpful. Now, we've come to the end of our half hour, so it's time for a message from our sponsors. And why do we have a message from our sponsors? Because we love our sponsors. Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Reverend Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Reverend Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours. And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Reverend Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. Our last auction was this recent Saturday evening. It was a lovely auction, and we had metaphysical books, we had haunted dolls, we had spell kits. It was a lot of fun. And I will let you know when the next one was. And in the chat room, Timothy says, go for quality art supplies. Well, yes, absolutely. And speaking of art, on May 9th, we're going to be having um, a Don Lewis art auction. And it will involve many pieces of my art, both originals and prints. And watch for more about that in the future. And we are busy working to put that together. So I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you have today as the start of a wonderful week. And let's close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all of the wonderful things in our life, and we ask you to help us to be open to seeing the ways in which we limit ourselves through our shadow, and help us to be open to healing and releasing that energy and reusing it in our present lives for positive things. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love. Knowing you're always with us still, we thank you for your presence. May you be blessed. And I thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and always.